Welcome back to the NutraRounds Way to Work podcast. I'm Ashley here with Jake and Todd, and today we want to welcome our very special guest, Dr. Scott Bergman. He's a chiropractor, board-certified naturopath, diplomat in integrative medicine, and a science officer for NutriDyn Nutraceuticals. Since 1993, he's been the director of chirokinetics in Walnut Creek, California, which is an integrative clinical practice built on the philosophy that lasting health depends on interconnected pathways, structure, function, biochemistry, and biological resonance. As USA Triathlon Level 1 coach, he trained under Ironman legend Dave Scott, and as he coached hundreds of athletes to the finish line at Ironman distance events and served as a nutritional consultant to national and world champion triathletes, including Lunachic's professional team. His published work on exercise recovery and the mTOR and AMPK pathways reflect his commitment to bridging clinical science and real-world performance. And today we're excited to dig in to all of that with Dr. Bergman. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, guys. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Hey, Dr. Bergman, thank you again for joining us. I know our listeners are in for a big treat. I know you shared with us earlier, but tell the listeners kind of what brought you to NutriDyn, the history, the start. That was an awesome story you filled in us earlier.
Yeah, as almost everything in my life, it was a fortunate accident. There was a Charles Poliquin seminar occurring. Charles Poliquin is a very famous power and strength coach, pretty legendary. And there was a speaker who dropped out at the last moment, and Greg Peterson had made a phone call saying, "Hey, we need a guy. Does anybody know anybody?" And I get a call on a Thursday asking if I could fly to Arizona and speak for 6 hours on Saturday. And there was a group of people, and everyone had to leave. I think I got to shake Greg Peterson's hand, and on a Tuesday he called back and said, "Hey, I hear that went pretty well. Maybe there's some other things that we can do with each other." And I was asked to do some speaking engagements for NutriDyn, and during that discussion with some of the owners, Greg had asked, if there was anything that you would make, what would you make? And I quickly said, we need an electrolyte formula that is not only high end for professional athletes, but can be given to children, can be given to the geriatric population, that could be used throughout the day, but something on a clinical line without sugars. And that discussion went on for maybe about 8 months or so, and then they said, "Give us a formula." And we threw the formulation out there, and Josh and Joel started looking at flavors, and there was the first hydrate that came up.
Oh, yeah.
So hydrate I just actually sent some samples again to a clinician, and she came back with, "This is delicious. This is one of the best things." And so we've talked about this a lot in our podcast. We all, have been around and have our own children and young athletes, and compliance. That is just one of the remarkable things about all that's in this formula. You threw out Charles Poliquin. We kind of ran across him in our history of doing this. He was connected to some of the highest level strength coaches and performance coaches in D1 professional athletics. So for those of you who are not familiar, Dr. Bergman has plugged into some really exceptional athletic performance, clinicians. And so that's why we're so excited to have him talk about this. And so it would actually be great if you wouldn't mind kind of walking us through Dynamic Hydrate. And I just wanted you to know, I wore my Chelsea jersey just for you today, just in honor of your sports acumen. So yeah, thank you so much for an aging athlete like myself for keeping me in the game. So if you wouldn't mind, Dr. Bergman, walking us through the hydrate formula a little bit so docs know how they can apply that.
In terms of how we apply it in the office?
Or if you wanted to just take us through a presentation of hydrate or some of the ingredients at whatever level you feel would be good. We'd love that. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. One of the main issues, certainly we need our sodiums and potassiums for our main electrolytes. But one of the things that we deplete over time that's pretty much underappreciated is magnesium. And so making sure that there was a very, very high amount of a bioavailable magnesium that was not only necessary during exercise, but almost more importantly, after exercise and replenishing. And that needed to happen throughout the day because most of the body's performance is, as we have discovered, has a lot to do with how well we recover. And other than the professional athletes, the professional athletes, they wake up, they go out, they'll swim, 5,000 meters. They come home, they eat, they take a nap, they get on the bike, they go out for a couple hours, they come back, they eat, they get a massage. It's very structured, but that's only the 0.5% of of the population. Most of the quote unquote athletes are what we call age groupers, people who are working full time, have a family, have responsibilities. They have to put in their 40 hours and they're still finding time to train sometimes for an Ironman, sometimes 25, 30 hours a week. And what we were finding was when people were sitting at their desk, they were still eating and drinking as if they were on a bike. And things that you had to take in while you were exercising was very different than if you were sitting at a computer. So all of these electrolyte drinks that had high amount of sugars or the energy bars, cyclists and triathletes and runners, they were eating them all day. It was causing like almost insulin resistant type situations because they were just eating so many carbs at rest. So we realized that we needed to have some sort of formula that someone can drink all day, replenish their B vitamins, replenish their magnesium all day so that when they do train, they're not in a depleted hole. So magnesium was like a major thought process, and finding the right magnesium was essential for athletics. You'll see a lot of things on the market where the magnesium they have, it's either very, very low or it's like a magnesium citrate. And what we know about magnesium citrate is that that is a stool softener. And the last thing you want to give an endurance athlete is a stool softener. So magnesium was a major player. We wanted to make sure that the B vitamins were there for adrenal support, for being able to handle cortisol levels, specifically with the endurance athletes. And so it's very, very easy to dump very cheap B vitamins in, but we were able to use the methylated B vitamins so that it's much, much more absorbable. And it's not a small amount. There's actually a nice amount of folate and B12. And so that was a major concern for us for methylation, for detoxification. Because a lot of times, again, not only is it about recovery, but it's what the body is able to clear and being able to clear the lactic acid and detoxify. So we needed the methylated B vitamin. We put in a really good B5 and B6 again for adrenals, and then when we were looking at the other electrolytes, we wanted to put in the highest quality electrolytes specifically with like some sort of clinical aspect in mind. So even the calcium is a calcium D-glucarate, and a calcium D-glucarate is very helpful for liver detox. It's very helpful for estrogen metabolism. One of the things that we found with the very, very high end professional athletes in endurance sports was testosterone levels were normal for normal people, but for these world class athletes, they were kind of on the low side. And some of that had to do with overtraining and constantly dealing with inflammation. And we wanted to be able to clear estrogens out because once you have, if you think about the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal, and when the cortisol levels are very high, that can actually upregulate aromatase, which upregulates estrogen. So with world-class athletes, you have to worry about doping. You can't give them things, but what we could do is strip things out. And what we found is when we stripped out estrogens, their testosterone levels exploded. So having something like the calcium D-glucarate was something we thought about for long-term use with a very light, mild liver detoxification profile. And then we had malic acid in there, and that was used for a long time for fibromyalgia patients. And it was actually how I got into sports nutrition in the first place, because we're using a high amount of malate for fibro. And I just thought, well, if this is great for people with a condition, what would it do for a superior athlete? And so we put a good amount of malic acid in there, 500 milligrams, and the L-carnosine we decided to put in there for hydrating the cell, for monitoring the pH of the tissues so that we didn't get too acidic, and that would dampen the amount of lactic acid buildup, and nourishing the cell and driving nutrients into the cell. So that the L-carnosine was something that we thought would be pretty important. And then one of the magic ingredients, I think, was the taurine. And there's just so many things that taurine does. But just on its basic level, it helps increase bile acids. Well, the more efficient we're producing bile, the more efficient our digestion is. And for the endurance athletes, when you're out there for, on the bike, sometimes 5, 6 hours, what will happen with high end exercise is blood will get shunted from the stomach to the muscles so that the muscles can stay oxygenated. And it's really, really hard to digest food. So we wanted to make sure that we were able to improve digestion during and as a recovery to be able to have that taurine over time. And taurine will upregulate other nutrients as well. Like that's why they have it in Red Bull, because taurine and caffeine help out. But taurine is also a really powerful antioxidant. It can act as a neurotransmitter. It reduces central nervous system fatigue. So we were thinking about that for definitively those very hot days when you're out there for a long period of time. If you could reduce the perception of, oh my gosh, I'm failing or I'm about to bonk, it allows you to go further and longer. And we know that it improves oxygen utilization and helps with fat oxidation for fuel. So taurine, there's 500 milligrams of taurine in there. And just drinking it on a regular basis, even while you're not exercising, it helps upregulate GABA and it reduces cortisol. So it even helps if you have a cortisol issue on a daily basis. So luckily NutriDyn was willing and excited to throw that formula together, and it seems like it's working out.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. We use it all the time in my house, multiple times a day. And I learned the hard way about not taking too much magnesium citrate when I was on a long road race from Madison to Chicago called Ragnar. Too many noon in my water was not a good idea. So I appreciate the consideration for things like that, for sure. I'm sure lots of your athletes probably learned the hard way at a time.
Yeah, and one of the things about the pros is what is written on their bottle is often not what is in the bottle because they've tried things and it really messes their gut up a lot. And yeah, but one day I asked, so what does it take to get the NutriDyn Hydrate on your jersey? And they said, yeah, you can't afford it. So we we uh, we moved on from there quickly.
So, speaking of that, you've done some analyzing of products that we see out on the shelf, all over the place, really, like LMNT, Liquid IV, and Pedialytes. Can you talk a little bit about what the shortcomings? I mean, you've hit on some of it, but I think for people who a lot of times we hear like, there's so many out there. Why would they want to buy this one? For me, it's a little bit more
Sure.
expensive. So those are some of the challenges I think we see in clinic with getting this into people's hands. So being able to educate them a little bit more on why this is such a standout product.
Yeah. Do you guys remember the saying, the most expensive product is the one that doesn't work?
Absolutely.
So that's one thing that we might have a conversation in the office about. That's just a simple conversation. But so there is plenty of over the counter products very readily available. You let me know if I'm okay to name names, but there's some that come in tablet form and you drop it into the water and it's all the carbonate electrolytes. It's like calcium carbonate and potassium carbonate and magnesium carbonate. So essentially, it's Alka-Seltzer. And one of the issues with Alka-Seltzer is that it does what it says it's going to do. It's going to reduce acid, but we need a level of acid in the stomach to digest nutrients. We need acid to absorb our iron. We need acid to absorb our calcium. And if we're doing carbs while we're training, we need stomach acid to absorb those carbohydrates. And if you don't, it sits in the gut and it gets sloshy and it gets uncomfortable. And that's where we get that saying runner's gut, if you've heard of that. And so I think those tablets are useful in a pinch. If there's a problem, you start feeling yourself bonking and you need that for your stomach to settle. But drinking it all day as an electrolyte replenisher will actually make things worse for your digestion. So that's one of the guys there. And then you've got a couple out there with very, very high sodium, which is useful during activity. But what we determined was a long time ago is, runners can use salt tablets. Cyclists can use salt tablets. We could find like just pure sodium anywhere. You'll see the pros, they'll have something on their bike where there's a bunch of salt tablets just stuck on their on the hood of their bike bars. So we didn't need a lot of salt, and sodium utilization is so very unique that it was never going to be right for everyone. And so you could say, oh, it's got 500 milligrams of sodium or 1,000. That's going to work for maybe 10% of the people, depending on what their sweat rate is and how much sodium they're actually losing. So you can't use like an element or a liquid IV all day long at your computer. You shouldn't be drinking that much sodium. So there's too much there. And then there's a bunch of them on the market that you really have to be careful with because of the artificial sweeteners. You've got like Propel and Drip Drop. That's a big one. That's being handed out all over the place. But once you start using those artificial sweeteners and now you're making your digestive tract and your liver work harder, that's not good for trying to build muscle. The body's either going to detoxify or produce, it's the hepatocytes in the liver that produce these satellite cells that stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So without the liver working properly, you can't produce muscle. So let's not stress the liver out while we're exercising.
I love that. And we've kind of like hit upon this idea a bunch, but you've written and you're kind of alluded to this, that the body doesn't actually, exercise doesn't actually build the body. It like breaks it down. And so you're I love what you said about different nutrition for during performance and then the rest of the day. And so, I mean, you really illustrated well, but can you unpack that a little bit more as to, so now we're away from exercise and we're at the desk, but like, what is like sort of the way that you approach that for your aging athlete or just really anybody who's looking, to stay hydrated or healthy?
Yeah, so everyone has heard about the pre-workout, what you should take pre-workout. I always recommend depending on the exercise and how long, but you should be slamming a hydrate before you go out for your run. If you're going to be running longer than an hour, hour and a half, you should slam a hydrate and the core aminos. And it's very, very light on the stomach. It's not like taking in a whey protein drink or something heavy, but you could drink that down and take in those essential amino acids that the body can actually use as fuel. The branch chains can convert directly to mobilize energy. So that's the pre-workout. During the workout, it depends on what the workout is. Maybe it's just the hydrate to keep the body hydrated and get the electrolytes in and have that magnesium. If you're out for long periods of time doing endurance, every other hour, well, 1 hour I would do hydrate. The next hour I would do hydrate and core aminos. And then third hour, hydrate. Fourth hour, hydrate aminos. So you could do that during what we call the intra workout. And then there's the PEN, the post exercise nutrition. And that's where your muscles have been working. They're all warmed up. They're like sponges. They really, really want to take in the fuel to replenish the glycogen. So within the first 20 to 30 minutes, you want your PEN, your post exercise nutrition. And again, I would be very, very satisfied with a hydrate and a core aminos as a PEN. The goal is to try to extend mTOR for as long as possible from that workout. And the mTOR is what will stimulate the muscle protein synthesis and cell proliferation. And at a certain point, you then want to, well, let me go back and say things that will upregulate the mTOR is leucine. So that's in the core aminos. Carbs. So once your stomach settles and you want to have a meal, that's where you want to get a good complex carbohydrate with some proteins in it. Then as the day or night progresses, that's when you want to start switching over to what I'll say mTOR is yang and AMPK is yin, right? You got to have yin and yang to balance out the body. So the AMPK is what will then start to upregulate autophagy and apoptosis and tissue repair. So first we want, excuse me, first we want the muscle proliferation, and then we want the pruning of the AMPK.
Yep. That's awesome, Dr. Bergman. Kind of shifting over like to like elite athletic performance. In the past, you kind of mentioned like a 2% drop in hydration can cause a 50% reduction in athletic performance, where a lot of times like most people may think of dehydration as just feeling thirsty. Like how big of a factor is hydration actually proven to be in athletes you work with, and how is it kind of underestimated as well?
Well, I think it's the number one issue of what we underestimate for sure. And if you've ever, like Ashley was talking about her marathon or her big event, you look at marathon runners and you'll just watch some of them crawling over the finish line because of the bonk. And the bonk is not because of a lack of carbohydrates. It's almost always because of hydration. We used to think the bonk, like, let's carbo load at night, which we now don't like to do. We now find that the carbo loading, like the pasta meal, because of the high carbohydrates, it actually dehydrates you. So you're waking up in the event, the morning of the event, dehydrated. As we'll lose a good 30% of our hydration just because of our metabolism at night. So we're almost always just waking up dehydrated. One of the issues of the hydration though, and I'm not sure which comes first. It might be a chicken or egg conversation, but the more dehydrated we are, the more it damages the cell walls. The more the cell walls get damaged, the less hydrated we can be, the less water we retain inside the cell. So if you guys have ever used like a bioimpedance machine where it measures total body water, intracellular, extracellular waters, well, the intracellular, extracellular water has to do with mostly lipids, our essential fatty acids, to have a strong cell wall to then hold water. When we're measuring in the office using a BIA, we want to have between 60 and 65% of our body is water. Once we get below 50%, we're going to see some level of performance decline. So it's 2% lower than the 50%, if that makes sense. So if someone's already in a state of dehydration and they're out there, yeah, people who have been out on a long run and hit a bonk or during an event and hit a bonk, they know what that 2% water loss is like. But realize that you're already below 50% at that point, if that makes sense. So then once you get to 5%, you're actually getting into dizziness, fainting, even like a little numbness and tingling. And at 10 to 15%, you're looking at muscle spasms, loss of vision, even some kidney damage. You know, we had some athletes that I was working with where they were even getting like a rhabdomyolysis, a rhabdo, from being out there too long. So that's kidney damage. And at 15% loss, that could be fatal. Now, when you flip that, you know, the college hazing issues, people were trying to find something less serious. So they were making kids drink a gallon of water and chug, and it created such a hyponatremic state. They didn't have enough electrolytes in their body that their heart stopped, because the heart's a muscle. Hydration is key for our performance, for our cognition, for everything. You know, just even our Krebs cycle requires hydration in at least two of the complexes. You need hydrogen, oxygen somewhere just within our electron chain transport. So yeah, if in order to have energy, you need to be hydrated. And our bodies are, specifically our tissues, are highly polar. Our entire connective tissue can be made up of like collagen and elastin, but the ground substance, these glycosaminoglycans, are highly, highly polar molecules. And the only way we get polarity is with electrical conduction. We need those electrolytes. Without magnesium and calcium and sodium and potassium, we can't have a healthy connective tissue. That's a big deal.
Yeah, that is. And the water, that's a scary thing that had been really an issue for a lot of people. I know in the bodybuilding community, they'll like run just gallons of distilled to try to flush. And there's been some really serious side effects from over hydrating the wrong way. So I'm glad that you pointed that out. Also, you touched on it a little bit, like just everyone's waking up dehydrated. And I know that this formula was developed for high-end endurance athletes, but it's beneficial for really everyone, like a cold and flu season. I even speak to it in terms of with all the antioxidant and B vitamins in there for people who are under any type of high stress, not necessarily exercise induced. So can you talk a little bit about how this applies to just general population in different ways?
Yeah, that was the main conversation with NutriDyn, was we got to make sure it's not just a one category formulation. It has to span across several. I I would ask all the docs out there, you show me a geriatric patient who isn't dehydrated. None of them like to drink fluids. They don't like plain water. They like something with flavor, but obviously that they're choosing things that are non-optimal, whether it's sodas or energy drinks or whatever it may be. So it's great for the geriatric population. Most of the elderly are on some sort of pharmaceutical which will deplete major nutrients. There's not one pharmaceutical that you can point to that doesn't have at least one nutrient depletion. Now, we give it and recommend it for our pediatric patients as well. This is the replacement for Pedialyte. And if the docs are willing to go online and look up the ingredients on Pedialyte, most of them have artificial sweeteners. And to give an infant an artificial sweetener, that I think that's the wrong path. I think we all agree on that. Kids love it because the hydrate comes in the little packets. We did that specifically for our cyclists so that you don't have to carry your formulation around. If you just have these little sachets, that if you can get to the next 7-Eleven or the next, water fountain or something like that, you could just fill up your water bottles. So the sachets are great for all the kids playing soccer and baseball, and they're on the fly and parents don't want to carry around a canister. So it's great for the kids. It's great for all the athletics that they're dealing with. But then like you said, we're talking about just the age grouper active person or age grouper high-end athlete where they must restore the B vitamins and the electrolytes because of the exercise that they induced on themselves. The body has to repair. And you could drink the hydrate all day long and you don't have to worry about it being 1,000 calories or something like that. I think there's 5 calories to it. I don't remember. So this is a product that if you had what we did in our office is we took the canisters, and once they were empty, we sat them at the front desk and we put the corresponding sachets into those, and it just looks pretty. And that way, our front desk is able to recommend them. It reminds me to talk to the patients about it when it's at the front desk. It's like, hey, just pick up a couple flavors, see which one you like. And then that says, oh, my kid likes the grape the best, or my kid likes the lemonade the best. And that's an easy transition for patients. And now that it's going to get hotter, it's even more important. And regardless of where you are, I'm on the West Coast, it's a dry heat, but humidity can even be more of an electrolyte utilization. So wherever you are, this is the time to start promoting that in the office so that the kids aren't bonking. Remember, once they get dehydrated, they could start pulling muscles. They could start having sprained strains. This is a really good, easy, almost injury prevention formula.
Well, you got me fired up. I love you mentioned like the end practice. So like for all our clinicians listening now, like that want to get serious about hydration, what does that actually look like in practice? I know you use like sweat rate tests. What's kind of like the daily minimum intake, and how would you like personalize a protocol for say like someone doing endurance training versus an office worker who's just chronically underhydrated?
Yeah, so the sweat rate is something that we would do with our athletes, and it doesn't have to be too technical. Let's say it's a cyclist. And what we would do is we would have them weigh themselves with one bicycle bottle worth of water, just water. And we want them to go out and we want them to exercise hard for an hour above tempo. And when they get back, they can drink whatever they wish during that hour. And when they get back, if they haven't finished the bottle, take off the wet clothes, hold that wet the bottle if there's more water in it, and get back on the scale. Every pound that they lost was 16 ounces of fluid. That's just the easiest way to look at it. So that's someone's sweat rate. Each pound or each 16 ounces, the average person has lost 500 milligrams of sodium. So if you are out there, and it's not unheard of to lose 2 pounds or 3 pounds in that hour, then you know that your sweat rate was 1,500 milligrams of sodium. And that's not unheard of. The average is about like 500 or 600 milligrams, but it can go up to 12 to 1,500. And then we recommend when we were training for Ironman, and it was a 10-month training program, we would do a sweat rate test each season because the individual had different sweat rates in the fall, in the winter, and in the summer. And depending on where they were racing, made a difference. So if we were training out here in California, but they were doing Ironman Florida, we had to figure out a system of figuring out how they were going to respond to the humidity. Some of the pros would actually lock themselves in their bathroom and create a steam room, and they would get on their bike trainer and do a hard hour bike session to figure out their sweat rate in humidity. And especially a couple of our pros who competed and podiumed at Kona at the World Championship. Hawaii is Hawaii. It's humid and you have to deal with that stuff. So sweat rate was something that we did for our athletes. During our consults, we would figure that out. So that's the sweat rate, that's their replenishing, and that's how much fluid they would have to take in. Some people, it was, oh, I only need 16 ounces an hour. And some people were 35 ounces an hour. It was crazy. Yeah. So so that's the sweat rate. deal on a daily basis for normal people. We just want to look at a simple formula of half your body weight in fluid ounces of water. So if you're 150 pounds, it's 75 ounces of fluid. If you're 200 pounds, it's 100 ounces of fluid. Then with that 100 ounces, how much electrolytes should we be drinking? The average intake, or the intake that was studied the most, was everybody should be taking in, this is not including sports, but everyone should be taking in about 5,000 milligrams of sodium a day, for about 5 grams. And they actually did a worldwide study on the hydration, and they found that the countries that were in about that 5 gram space had the lowest incidence of cardiovascular disease. So, not too much. Obviously, we're looking at the hypertensive situation, but not enough was causing the same issue, because without the electrolytes, the body has to work harder, and so the heart starts pumping harder, and the vascular tissue will start to constrict to actually increase the blood pressure because of the lack of electrolytes. So 5 grams is about a teaspoon of sodium. So that should be your daily intake. And we're not talking about like the white sodium chloride that we see at Denny's, or like the packets of salt at McDonald's, but like a nice sea salt, Celtic salt. If you know that you're taking in about a teaspoon of that kind of sodium, that is very, very healthy. And then drinking, I would say 1 to 2 hydrates a day, because that will give you your magnesium, that'll give you your B vitamins, that gives you that taurine for the GABA, for the mood. That's my recommendation, is 1 to 2 a day. But you should be drinking it all, throughout any soccer tournament or baseball tournament, or the kids that are out there for 6 hours. You got to keep them going.
While you were talking, Doc, I just ordered like every flavor, a couple of those just to keep in my house because that was awesome. And we definitely are underutilizing it. And I loved your the little containers and filling those. But for our clinicians listening, we can provide you with a board, a hydrate board to get you started with some of those samples so that your patients can try some of that and you can replenish with those sachets like Dr. Bergman was talking about. We could talk to you literally all day. This has been brilliant. But what we like to do is share a story, and usually it's about a patient, but I have a personal one. Myself and my son, who at the time was 12, and then all my brother-in-laws decided when one of them moved to Colorado, we're going to do a 14er. And so we picked Mount Elbert right off the cusp, and none of us prepared. None of us prepared. And they're like, "You're the vitamin guy. Why don't you load us up?" And so a couple days before the flight, I'm looking at like what I have on hand and started reading blog posts. And the one guy said, "I've climbed all over the world, and this is by far the hardest. We're in trouble. We're in big trouble." So I just threw in some stuff that we had, but I definitely included a thing of hydrate, and it was literally a lifesaver. We got close to summiting, and my son was like a little mountain goat. He had my pack on and was ahead of us. But we were slogging like we were in Dante's Inferno, sitting down every 30 feet and definitely dangerously dehydrated. Some of the tingling and numbness and confusion and altitude sickness up the wazoo. But had that hydrate and we were hitting it every hour, like you said. I remembered hearing one of your presentations, and thankfully I got that in my kid because he bonked, he real hard. And I hit him with hydrate. We got up to the top, took pictures with the hydrate because we're like, there's no way we would have gotten up here without this. But got it hit him a whole nother bottle of that. And on the way back down, I was really glad to have done that because he got some of the serious symptoms of altitude sickness right before we summited. And by the time we were back, everybody was ready to be in recovery mode and all passed out. But it really did pull us through that experience that could have been dangerous because we were not smart enough to do it the right way. But so thank you so much for that presentation and for formulating this beautiful product that I'm now going to be drinking on the hour every hour.
Yeah.
So that's what I had to share. But Ashley and Todd, anything before we let Dr. Bergman get back to saving lives?
No, it was awesome. Thanks, Doc. Really appreciate you stopping in for us.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. I am an avid drinker of it. It helps me with like that tension cramping that I get in my shoulders. Even if I'm just like sitting working at the computer, I start to get that burning sensation. I drink some hydrate and it really kind of melts it away. But something that I now drink every morning for my coffee, right? Because we know that depletes magnesium too. So again, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate you being here. We love the formula and are excited to get this into all of our clinicians' hands.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey guys, have a great week. We'll talk to you next time.
Take
Thank
care.
you.